Alright, we're rolling. Hey, how's it going? It's Gabriel, and I'm here with volume 13 of this education series. So I'm going to try and wrap up some of these weird educational engineering lingo that I've been talking about. So in my first video, I talked about, or my first educational engineering thing, I talked about kind of choice, what choices are available, and that it might be difficult to make those choices because you might not have all the information you want. And there's actually something called the law of confusion, which governs some of the, which governs like how you will never have all the information you need in life, and that's just part of the ride. So there's always going to be a flawed understanding of reality when you're incarnated, and that's kind of like, that's just part of it. And then in the second video I talked about how those choices play out over time, and what kind of values can shape those choices. And one of the values I talked about specifically was necessity. So if you see like a need to join the military because of an enemy military, or if you see like the Whore of Babylon running for president, who you have given campaign contributions to, you know, you might consider running for president yourself, and we'd all be thankful if you did. And then in my last video I talked about the quality of life considerations most people make, and kind of like the idea that information is controlled, so like any changes to these systems will probably not be televised, they'll probably be suppressed. Oh, I didn't say that, but that's something you should probably, you'd assume. It's a good song, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. So I'm gonna kind of try to sum this all up, give some recaps. And there's a really good quote by a man named Mark Twain, who I'm a big fan of, and he said, I never let my schooling get in the way of my education. And, you know, there's a whole lot of truth to that. I would say you are responsible for your own education in this world. You know, your parents will do what they can to provide for you, but at the end of the day, if you are in an education system, that system will have constraints, it will have flaws, and you should always be trying to improve your education system. Or not always, but, you know, if you're pursuing education, you should be also trying to just improve that. I guess you should just be cognizant that there will be flaws. So yeah, that's a good quote from someone. I was just looking through a yearbook today and saw that. So optimizing is a big part of engineering, but it's actually not that important in your education, because you're never going to completely optimize your quality of life. You know, it can be good, but really, since your perspective on your life changes how happy you are. Like, there was this Greek slave who realized if he just focused on what he controlled, he would be really happy. So, you know, part of this optimization is really not even in your education. It's just in understanding what you can control, and that, you know, one of the things about your mental state is that it will influence your quality of life. And then assessing risk. So we're going to get into that a little bit more tonight. That's from my first video, so get ready for that. And from my last video, one of the things I didn't really talk about enough was that one of the reasons we need educational engineering is because there's a lack of understanding of the economy among educators. Educators typically are kind of like people who have worked within the matrix reality to assure a income for themselves, and they might not have a great understanding of finance or these other topics that someone behind a desk is not going to be approving of you learning about or want to discuss with you even. So that's a real flaw in our education system, is just the lack of economic understanding among the populace and among educators specifically. So if you have a good economics teacher, it's worth a lot. And then one thing I touched on is game theory, and how you kind of need to look at your education like a game of chess. And so game theory is like a technical term for just imagining that there are other people making choices based on the choices you make, and also that you're making choices based on choices other people make, and that interplay of choice is going to shape what choices are available, and also how much leeway you're going to get or you should give. And it's a complicated topic because people's interactions are very complicated, so I'm not gonna like go super in depth about it, but it's not as simple as a chess game, because a chess game only has a certain number of pieces, and there's really a finite number of possibilities, but really life is crazy. Oh my god. I'm right now, my head is spinning, and I'll tell you something, there's a lot of stuff that I'm learning now that I didn't even think could, like, yeah. So game theory is just the idea that you should just be cognizant that there's another person on the other side of that social engineering education system, and that your education is going to be shaped by them, and then the choices you make will also shape them, because if you blow up a school, I mean not blow up, but if you like are speaking so much truth that you kind of deplatform an educational institution, there's going to be a response. Or if you speak so much truth on Facebook that, you know, your profile or a piece of philosophy goes viral, there's going to be a response. And if you don't imagine that as a game theory scenario, you know, I think people understand what I'm talking about. So there are multiple players. It's not just two people on a chessboard. Got it? Good. So, tonight I'm going to talk somewhat about systemic risks. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of try to put a wrap on everything. So one other value that I didn't really touch on in the second video is malleability. So that's the idea that some educations will be better suited towards being able to move or change career tracks. So like engineers typically can work in a variety of fields, not just engineering. And that means that you have more freedom, you can do a greater variety of stuff. And yeah, so malleability can also be something because it can improve quality of life, and it is a valuable thing to have. One other thing is that, let's say you are super into your educational engineering. Number one, you're kind of ignoring the fact that God is really in control. And there's a great quote that men plan and God laugh, I guess. And there's also the idea that if you can be adaptable to other people in your family, that's going to allow you to form that codependent community that's really allows for a good quality of life as well. So even if you are good at educational engineering and you think you have it all worked out, you know, I would say being able to change your plans and adapt to, you know, family members who have other priorities, it's very valuable as well. All right. So, So one of the other things I haven't talked about is that there's a devaluation of skills in a diploma-based system, and that is something I haven't really gotten into, is like the idea that you may also, like, a lot of people will put their kids into music, and there's like a lot of things like music that are not required for a diploma, but that's people like to see on a resume because it's a good skill to have, and it improves the quality of your labor and just kind of like the quality of the interactions you have with people. So even if you are a good educational engineer, you might want to consider the fact that there are some skills outside of the education system that are also very valuable. Like a great example is like music or public speaking. Those are things you can't really study that well in the United States, but that they are incredibly, incredibly valuable. So I would definitely recommend anybody who wants to get a great education studying those things, because music specifically, music is great for kids to just makes things more relaxed. You can play music the wrong way, like you can definitely be too competitive about it and want to be the best instead of just improve kind of like the ambiance or whatever you want to call it. Like any skill can be abused and misunderstood, but can also be very valuable. Like if you're public speaking, during the March on Washington, and millions of people are listening, and you're changing history. So there's a lot of potential ways things can work one way or the other, but I would say if you are not kind of evaluating the skills you might want in the future, or the skills that you see being valuable among people whose quality of life you want to emulate, that's a great thing to look at, because just like learning history, those are things that can kind of be done individually and studied individually that can have a big impact on your quality of life. And also some things come naturally, so you might see some skills that you are just drawn to, and then finding that calling can really be valuable, especially if it's something with like a lot of variety. Like public speaking is like not a great calling because it's like kind of work, but like music does have such a variety of like things you can do with it, and teaching, and people you can interact with, and groups, and it's crazy. Yeah, it's a highly variable skill that is great in my opinion. I've enjoyed it. So there's other people who have kind of talked about their paths. Like John Locke has a lot of letters that he wrote when he was trying to get into Oxford, because he really thought that was his future was in. He knew that education would really drastically change his future. And you can kind of see what process he viewed, or how he viewed his educational engineering through those letters. And then guys like Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson, who became lawyers, those were like apprenticeship lawyers. And then the bar was literally just like an exam, an oral exam, I believe, given to you by the justices of your like state court. So I guess, I talked a lot about my career, I talked a lot about myself, and there's other people who have, great examples of. So look at what other people's educations have been, and don't just look at me, because I'm not, yeah. Like, another great example are, like, how women have been suppressed out of the education system. And yet there have been some very intelligent women. So, like, John Locke, he's, like, also another extremely well-educated person, but Abraham Lincoln was not as well-educated, and some people overcome the obstacles that they face in pursuing their educational pursuits. And yeah, those people obviously have a much better story than just the rich kid who got 5 years of engineering school, or the guy who ended up at Oxford and became an Oxford professor. But everybody's story is different, and a good education will involve struggle at some point. So it's not just like, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, and it's also definitely not like you should be glorifying one person over another, because yeah, we're all equal. So just wanted to talk about that. All right, and also in Hebrew, the school I went to when I was a kid, it was called a Beit Sefer, which means a house of books. So Jews typically own the most books out of any, ethnic or religious group, whatever you want to call them. I tend to think it's a religion, but that's just me. So if you have access to books, you can, I don't know, I think there's a possibility for you to get an education, personally. But they could be the wrong books, it could be misinformation. It's not, all books aren't created equal. It's just a question of can you access different libraries and stuff like that, and then can you discern misinformation from not, and is it, for you, is it a pursuit of truth, or is it a pursuit of, signaling that you're educated by reading more books instead of actually discerning which books are the truth and which aren't? And also kind of being able to put your nose to the grindstone and work hard, because nonfiction's harder to read. And kind of also at some points you're going to have to engage with people and test the ideas that you read about, or how well you can remember them. Like, there's a lot of other stuff too, but if you can get a book, if you can spend time with it, grapple with the ideas, bounce them off other people, it can be very helpful. So, one big topic I haven't gotten to yet is systemic risk, or what I called in my second video, random systemic risk. So, I'm just going to check the time really quick, because this is an important thing, and I'm just going to see what I'm at. Alright, so I have like 5 minutes. Okay, so systemic risk, I'll probably get more into this in my next video, but at the least, systemic risk includes global cataclysm, which Graham Hancock has described as frequent, once every 12,000 years or so, and that's based on the work of Plato. So global cataclysm, global disease, like the Black Plague, which weirdly wasn't just a random disease. There were reports of people in black cloaks dressed like the Grim Reaper, with those like a long staff and then like a rod coming off the top of it, or like a kind of a scythe-looking thing, waving them back and forth around areas before they before the disease spread there, which is super creepy. There's risk of a major fire in your city, like in the city of London in 1666, which also took 4 weeks, and according to Peter Shipp, was not a random event. So now I'm kind of getting into the idea that there may be some, by not a random event, sorry, I mean that it was purposefully produced by the powers there so that a new banking center could be built in London. So, okay, disease, global cataclysm, global fire, any kind of systemic food shortages can occur. A treasonous leader. There's a great quote that a nation can survive, like, and then they list a bunch of things, but it cannot survive its traitors. Food shortages, natural weather events, which can also be produced by dark forces, as I talked about in my last written piece, that many times large fleets have been wiped out, and yeah, you can look into that if you're interested on Revelations 10:7. Bacon's Rebellion reigned for six months straight. So, what else? I'm trying to avoid the big one for that. Save the best for last, you know. There's a military risk that you could see a rise of a totalitarian regime, or you could see a invasion take place. And so you could quantify each of these risks by some probability. It'll be inaccurate because things are always changing, but based on those quantifications, you can assess kind of how likely they are, and then adjust where you're living, or what your career is in, or how much food you're going to stock in the house. Or, you know, some people who are like really distrustful that God exists are like carrying 6 months of food all the time in their house, and they have like 8 guns and stuff. Like, you know, if God wants you dead, you're not. It doesn't matter how many guns you have. It's not going to help you, in my view. Might be worth it if you really need to protect someone else, but yeah, just depends what your perspective is on that. All right, and then the biggest systemic risk that exists by far is financial systemic risk, which is a reduction in liquidity. If you look historically, there was far less. There was more sustenance farming in the past, so they would use more wars. But since sustenance farming has ended, the amount of liquidity crunches has increased a lot. So, like, there was a time when governments would just be like, oh, we need to go to war because they stole something from us, or they're insulting us, or, you know, whatever the case was. I don't know. And then people, like, eventually, I don't know. Things changed because we got industrial food supplies and larger populations that were, I don't know, I guess it's just harder, or maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm overgeneralizing here. Anyway, one of the things that's happened, though, is there is a rise in trade, and a rise in frequency of trades, and a rise in specialization that made people more dependent on liquidity. And that dependence can be seen, or that dependence causes a greater variety in valuations, which is termed it's called volatility in the banking world. And volatility allows bankers to make more money. So if you look at a military produces an incentive for a ruling power to take over another country so that they can tax and control trade. Therefore, there can be some people who have large amounts of control over wealth because they've taxed and controlled trade for so long. These are the dark people we've been talking about in the past. And those